The December wind cut through London's financial district like shards of ice, carrying with it the bitter promise of snow and the distant echo of Christmas carols from shop windows that seemed to mock the harsh reality of winter for those without warm homes to return to. Ozzy Osbourne pulled his collar higher against the cold as he walked through the nearly deserted streets, his usual entourage of security personnel and assistants nowhere in sight. A rare moment of solitude that he'd specifically requested after enduring a particularly brutal series of business meetings about his upcoming farewell tour. At 75, these stolen moments of anonymity had become increasingly precious to him. No cameras tracking his every movement, no handlers managing his interactions, no carefully orchestrated encounters with fans or media representatives. Just an aging rock legend walking through the city of his birth, trying to remember what it felt like to be invisible among the crowds of late commuters and Christmas shoppers who hurried past him without a second glance or moment of recognition. The sound that stopped him wasn't particularly loud or professionally polished. In fact, it was barely audible above the constant urban symphony of traffic noise, construction work, and the general cacophony that defined central London on a weekday evening in December. But something about the voice, young, raw, filled with an emotion that seemed far too mature and world-weary for its years, made Ozzy pause in his tracks and listen more carefully. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could show your support with a like. Your encouragement means the world to writers like me and helps stories like this reach more readers. Following the haunting melody down a narrow side street that most pedestrians ignored in their rush to reach warmer destinations, Ozzy discovered the source of the music, a boy who couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, sitting cross-legged on a piece of flattened cardboard with a battered acoustic guitar cradled carefully across his lap. His clothes were clearly chosen for survival rather than style, multiple layers of hoodies and sweaters beneath a worn winter coat that had obviously seen many harsh seasons, jeans with strategic patches covering holes, and sneakers held together with duct tape and determination. A small cardboard sign propped against his open guitar case bore a message written in careful handwriting. "Anything helps. Music heals. Thank you for listening." The few coins scattered across the worn velvet lining of the case suggested that generosity had been sparse that evening, but the boy continued playing with a dedication that spoke of necessity rather than hobby. But it was the specific song he was performing that truly captured Ozzy's attention and held it with an intensity that surprised him. The boy was singing Changes, Ozzy's own composition from Black Sabbath's 1972 album Volumes 4. And despite his obvious youth, he was bringing a haunting vulnerability to the familiar lyrics that spoke of life experiences no teenager should have been forced to navigate alone. Hearing his own words about growing older and facing life's inevitable transformations, sung with such raw emotion by someone so young, created a surreal, almost mystical moment of connection across decades. The kid's voice cracked occasionally, not from the uncertainty of adolescence, but from cold and exhaustion, and what sounded like unshed tears. Yet he continued playing with a determination that reminded Ozzy painfully of his own desperate early days, busking for meal money on the streets of Birmingham. There was something in the boy's dark eyes, a combination of stubborn hope and weary resignation, that suggested this wasn't just a temporary situation or a rebellious phase, but a way of life that had been forced upon him by circumstances entirely beyond his control. Ozzy approached slowly and deliberately, not wanting to startle the young performer or interrupt the delicate connection he was creating with the small group of passers-by who had stopped to listen. Up close, he could see that the boy was even younger than he'd initially estimated, probably 14 or 15 at most, with the kind of unhealthy thinness that spoke of irregular meals and constant uncertainty about where the next one might come from. His guitar was obviously cheap, probably purchased second-hand or found abandoned somewhere, but it had been maintained with the careful attention of someone who understood that this instrument was not just a creative outlet, but a genuine lifeline. "That's a beautiful song," Ozzy said gently, when the boy finished the verse and began the instrumental bridge. "You've got a real gift there, son." The boy looked up with immediately wary eyes, the kind of careful, practiced assessment that street-smart kids developed to quickly distinguish between genuine kindness and the various forms of potential danger that approached them daily. "Thank you, sir," he replied, his accent revealing hints of a middle-class background and decent education that existed before whatever series of catastrophes had led him to this particular street corner on this particular December evening. "I'm Ozzy," he said, crouching down to bring himself to the boy's eye level rather than looming over him. "What's your name, if you don't mind me asking?" "Danny," the boy replied after a long moment's hesitation, his fingers continuing to move across the guitar strings in nervous patterns, as if the music itself was his primary method of processing the unexpected attention from a stranger who seemed genuinely interested in his welfare, rather than just his musical performance. "Danny Morrison," he added, perhaps recognizing something trustworthy in Ozzy's manner, or maybe just grateful for human interaction that didn't involve being moved along by security guards or police officers. "How long have you been out here, Danny? Playing music on the streets, I mean?" The question hung in the frigid air between them like a challenge. Danny's fingers continued their unconscious movement across the guitar strings, finding chord progressions and melodic fragments, as if the instrument was an extension of his nervous system, a way of thinking and feeling that had become as natural as breathing. "About 8 months now," Danny finally answered, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone that people developed when they'd been forced to accept circumstances that should have been unacceptable. "Since my mum died from cancer and the foster care system, well, let's just say it didn't work out the way it was supposed to." The casual way he delivered this devastating information, no self-pity, no dramatic elaboration, no bid for sympathy, just a simple statement of facts that had completely derailed his young life, hit Ozzy like a physical blow to the chest. He'd encountered homeless youth before through various charity events and fundraising galas, but there was something about meeting Danny one-on-one, hearing him perform with such raw emotional honesty, that made the ongoing crisis of youth homelessness feel personal and immediate, rather than abstract and distant. "Where do you sleep at night?" Ozzy asked, though he wasn't entirely certain he was prepared to hear the answer. "Different places," Danny replied, with the practiced vagueness of someone who'd learned not to reveal too much about his survival strategies to strangers. "Youth shelters, when there's space available, which isn't often during winter. Doorways and emergency stairwells when there isn't. Sometimes the night buses if I can scrape together enough coins for a ticket. The music helps. People are more likely to let you stay somewhere if you're contributing something, rather than just asking for handouts." As they continued talking, with other pedestrians occasionally dropping coins into Danny's guitar case, or stopping briefly to listen before hurrying on to their own warm destinations, Ozzy learned that the boy had been performing on various street corners throughout London for the better part of a year, earning just barely enough to buy food and occasionally rent a bed at a youth hostel when the weather became truly dangerous. He'd taught himself to play guitar primarily through YouTube videos accessed at public libraries during their limited hours of operation, developing his repertoire by carefully observing and listening to other buskers in areas like Covent Garden and Camden, then practicing relentlessly until his fingers bled and his voice grew hoarse. Music had become not just his means of survival, but his primary form of emotional expression and psychological coping mechanism. "The Changes song is definitely my favorite," Danny explained, his eyes lighting up slightly as he discussed his musical preferences. "There's something about the way it talks about growing up and how life changes you, even when you don't want it to. The melody is beautiful, and the lyrics, they feel incredibly relevant to my situation, you know. Like maybe all of this struggle is leading somewhere meaningful, just like the song suggests about accepting change as part of life." The conversation continued for more than an hour, with Danny gradually relaxing and opening up as he realized that Ozzy's interest was genuine and non-threatening, rather than predatory or exploitative. He talked about his mother's prolonged battle with cancer, the overwhelming medical bills that had consumed their modest family savings, and eventually their home, the series of failed foster care placements that had resulted from an overburdened system focused more on processing cases than actually protecting vulnerable children. Most heartbreakingly, he described his eventual decision to strike out on his own, rather than remain in institutional care that felt more punitive than protective, more concerned with compliance than with his actual well-being or development as a human being. "I keep thinking about what my mum would want me to do," Danny said, his voice growing quiet but remaining steady with conviction. "She always told me that music was the one thing no one could ever take away from you, that it was worth more than money or possessions or even security, because it came from inside you, from your soul. She said that as long as I could make music, I'd never be truly alone or completely hopeless. Your mum was a very wise woman, Ozzy replied, feeling tears threatening for the first time in months. And I know she'd be incredibly proud of how you've survived all this, how you've managed to keep making beautiful music, even when everything else got stripped away from you. What happened next was something Ozzy would later describe to Sharon and close friends as the most impulsive and potentially life-changing decision he'd made in several decades. Without consulting his wife, his management team, his legal advisors, or any of the other people who normally helped him navigate complex personal and financial decisions, he made an offer that surprised even himself with its immediacy and comprehensive scope. "Danny," he said, his voice taking on the serious tone he typically reserved for the most important conversations, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you give me your answer. Would you be willing to let me help you? Not just money for tonight or this week, but real, substantial help. A safe place to stay, a chance to get your life back on track, opportunities to properly develop your musical abilities with professional training and guidance." The boy's dark eyes widened with a mixture of desperate hope and learned suspicion. "Why would you want to do something like that for me? You don't really know anything about me." Because music matters," Ozzy replied with absolute conviction. "Because talent and heart like yours shouldn't be wasted just because the system failed to protect you when you needed it most. And because..." He paused, searching for exactly the right words to express what he was feeling. "Because sometimes you encounter someone who reminds you why you fell in love with music in the first place. Someone who shows you that art can still matter in ways that go beyond entertainment or commerce." The comprehensive arrangement that Ozzy proposed was unprecedented in his personal life, but carefully structured to ensure Danny's safety, development, and long-term success, rather than just providing temporary relief. Rather than a simple charity gesture or impulsive good deed, he was offering a complete support system that would address the boy's immediate survival needs while providing genuine long-term opportunities for growth, education, and eventual independence. The first component was emergency accommodation in a small but comfortable guest apartment above the garage at Ozzy and Sharon's London residence, private and independent enough to give Danny space to adjust and heal from his trauma, but supervised and secure enough to ensure his safety and well-being during the critical transition period. The second element involved enrollment in a specialized educational program designed specifically for gifted young people who had experienced significant disruption in their schooling due to family crisis, homelessness, or system failures. This would provide both academic support to help him catch up on missed education and professional music training with some of London's most respected instructors. Most importantly, Ozzy arranged for Danny to work with a carefully selected team of social workers, trauma therapists, and legal advocates who specialized in helping homeless youth navigate the complex systems that were theoretically designed to protect them, but often failed catastrophically. This wasn't about circumventing official channels or avoiding proper oversight, but about ensuring that Danny had the expert support and professional representation necessary to make those systems work effectively on his behalf. Sharon's initial reaction when Ozzy called her from the street corner to explain what he was proposing was a complex mixture of concern, admiration, and the kind of practical questions that come from decades of managing both a family and a business empire built around unpredictable creative personalities. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked during their lengthy conversation that evening. Taking legal and emotional responsibility for a severely traumatized teenager isn't something you can undo easily if the situation becomes complicated or difficult to manage. "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life," Ozzy replied, with the kind of absolute conviction that Sharon had learned to recognize as indicating his deepest and most unshakable beliefs. "This kid has something genuinely special, not just raw musical talent, but character, resilience, the kind of inner strength that comes from surviving experiences that would completely break most people his age. He doesn't need charity or pity. He needs genuine opportunity and the kind of comprehensive support that should have been available to him from the beginning." The first several weeks of the arrangement represented a significant adjustment period for everyone involved in the situation. Danny had been living on the streets long enough to develop survival instincts and coping mechanisms that didn't translate well to domestic situations. He hoarded food compulsively, slept fitfully, and remained alert for potential threats even in the complete safety of his new environment, and found it difficult to trust that the help being offered was genuine and sustainable rather than temporary or conditional. But gradually, as days turned into weeks and the support remained consistent and unconditional, he began to relax into the kind of daily routine that most teenagers took completely for granted. Regular meals at predictable times, consistent shelter, regardless of weather conditions, access to healthcare and mental health support, and most importantly, the luxury of being able to focus on music and education rather than the constant stress of basic survival. The transformation in Danny's musical abilities was remarkable once he gained access to proper instruments and professional instruction. His natural talent and intuitive understanding of music, combined with the emotional depth that came from his difficult experiences, created a musical voice that was both technically accomplished and genuinely moving in ways that couldn't be taught or manufactured. "He's absolutely extraordinary," Danny's music teacher confided to Ozzy after their first month of regular lessons. "I've worked with students from the most prestigious conservatories and music academies who don't possess half of his intuitive understanding of how music can express complex human emotions. He's been through things that most adults never have to face, and somehow he's managed to channel all of that pain and growth into his artistic expression." 6 months after their first meeting on that cold December evening, Danny performed at a small charity concert that Ozzy organized specifically to raise awareness about youth homelessness and the systemic failures that created and perpetuated the crisis. His performance of Changes, the same Black Sabbath song that had first caught Ozzy's attention, brought the entire audience to their feet in spontaneous appreciation. But hearing his own composition performed with such heartfelt emotion by the young man whose life had been transformed was an almost overwhelming experience for Ozzy. It was Danny's original composition, however, a deeply personal piece about resilience, hope, and the transformative power of unexpected kindness that left many people in the audience openly weeping. "This song is dedicated to everyone who has ever felt invisible or forgotten by the world," Danny said into the microphone before beginning his original piece, "and especially to the people who choose to see us anyway, who remind us that we matter and that our stories deserve to be heard." The media coverage of Danny's remarkable story was extensive, but carefully managed by Ozzy's publicity team to protect the teenager's privacy, while highlighting the broader systemic issues of youth homelessness and institutional failures that had led to his dangerous situation. Rather than focusing primarily on the dramatic rescue narrative that would have generated more sensational headlines, interviews and articles emphasized the ongoing challenges facing thousands of young people who didn't have access to the kind of comprehensive intervention that had changed Danny's life trajectory. One individual story with a happy ending doesn't solve the massive systemic problems that create youth homelessness, Danny himself pointed out during a thoughtful interview with BBC Radio 4. "There are kids sleeping rough on the streets tonight who are just as talented, just as deserving of help and support as I was. The only difference is that I happened to be performing in exactly the right place when exactly the right person walked by and chose to stop and listen." A full year after their first encounter, Danny had been accepted into a highly competitive music program at one of London's most respected colleges, with comprehensive scholarship support that covered not only his tuition and educational expenses, but also his living costs and ongoing therapeutic support. More importantly, from a personal development perspective, he had become a passionate and articulate advocate for other homeless and at-risk youth, using his growing platform and media attention to raise both awareness and funds for programs that provided comprehensive support rather than just temporary emergency shelter. "The most important thing that Ozzy taught me," Danny reflected in a written piece that he contributed to a national youth advocacy magazine, "wasn't about music theory or business strategies or how to navigate the entertainment industry. It was about believing that I was genuinely worth investing in, worth taking serious risks for, worth caring about as a complete human being, rather than just treating me like a charity case or a problem to be managed." The ripple effects of Ozzy's impulsive decision that December evening extended far beyond Danny's individual success story and personal transformation. Inspired by the overwhelmingly positive outcomes they had witnessed and the profound personal satisfaction that came from making such a meaningful difference, Ozzy and Sharon established a comprehensive foundation focused specifically on providing holistic support to homeless and at-risk youth who showed exceptional artistic potential in music, visual arts, writing, or theatre. The foundation's approach was deliberately holistic and long-term, addressing not just immediate survival needs like shelter and food, but also the underlying trauma, educational gaps, legal complications, and systemic barriers that kept young people trapped in dangerous cycles of instability and homelessness. Each young person they supported received completely individualized assistance designed to help them build sustainable, independent lives while pursuing their artistic goals with professional guidance and support. We learned from Danny's experience that raw talent alone is never enough, Sharon explained to a gathering of potential donors at the Foundation's first annual fundraising gala. These remarkable young people need stability, professional therapy, educational support, legal advocacy, healthcare, and most importantly, they need adults who genuinely believe in their potential and are willing to invest in their long-term success rather than just providing temporary assistance. 3 years after that life-changing December evening encounter, Danny was performing professionally at venues throughout the UK while simultaneously completing his college degree, earning enough from his music and advocacy work to support himself completely independently while continuing his passionate commitment to helping other homeless youth access the comprehensive support they deserved. He maintained regular contact with Ozzy and Sharon, but their relationship had naturally evolved from benefactor and recipient to something much more meaningful and familial, a connection based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection rather than gratitude or obligation. People ask me constantly about that night when everything changed for me, Danny said during a radio interview promoting his first professional album release. They want to know if it felt magical or destined or like something out of a fairy tale or movie. But the honest truth is, it felt like someone finally saw me as a complete human being with unlimited potential, rather than just viewing me as a problem to be managed or avoided. The interviewer asked what advice he would give to other young people who were facing similar challenges and circumstances. Don't ever give up on yourself, even when everything else in your world falls apart completely, Danny replied without hesitation. Keep doing whatever it is that makes you feel most human and most alive. For me, that was music, but it could be visual art or creative writing or helping other people or anything that connects you to your authentic self. And please remember that most people in the world are fundamentally good. They just don't always know how to help effectively or where to direct their desire to make a positive difference. He paused thoughtfully, then added, and sometimes the most important thing that someone can do for you isn't giving you money or solving your immediate problems. It's seeing your true worth and potential when you've temporarily forgotten it yourself. Ozzy, listening to the interview from his home studio while working on new material, felt the same profound pride and satisfaction that he'd experienced watching his own children achieve important personal milestones and professional successes. But more than just personal satisfaction, he felt genuinely grateful for the reminder that individual actions could create meaningful, lasting change, that paying careful attention to the people that society often overlooked or dismissed could reveal extraordinary potential waiting to be nurtured and developed. You know what I think the most amazing part of Danny's whole story really is? He mentioned to Sharon that evening as they discussed the interview and reflected on the journey they'd all taken together. It's not that we were able to help him, though I'm deeply grateful that we could provide what he needed. It's that he was already absolutely remarkable when I first encountered him on that street corner. He just needed someone to notice his potential and provide the kind of comprehensive support that every child deserves to receive. 5 years after that first meeting, Danny Morrison had become a successful recording artist and internationally recognized youth advocate, using his platform and influence to ensure that other talented young people didn't have to choose between basic survival and pursuing their creative dreams. His foundation work had helped dozens of homeless and at-risk youth access the comprehensive support they needed to build stable, creative, fulfilling lives. But perhaps most importantly, his story had challenged thousands of people to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about homelessness, to look beyond surface circumstances and recognize the incredible potential that existed in every young person who had been failed by the systems that were designed to protect them. The boy who had been singing about change on a cold London street corner had indeed transformed, not just his own life trajectory, but the lives of everyone who encountered his music, his advocacy work, and his unwavering belief that every person deserved to be seen, valued, and supported in pursuing their dreams regardless of their current circumstances. Sometimes the most unthinkable act wasn't grand or dramatic or designed for public consumption. It was simply the fundamental human decision to stop, listen carefully, and recognize the extraordinary potential that could be found in the most unexpected places if you chose to look with compassion rather than judgment. Thank you for joining this incredible journey of compassion, music, and life-changing transformation. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the power we all have to change someone's life through simple acts of recognition and sustained support, I'd be absolutely thrilled if you could show your support with a like. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more readers and reminds us all that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply notice the extraordinary people around us who just need someone to believe in their unlimited potential.